5 celebrities who died broke despite making millions. Fame looks permanent. The applause, the flashing cameras, the sold-out arenas, the multi-million-dollar contracts. From the outside, it feels untouchable. But behind the spotlight, behind the luxury homes and award speeches, some of the biggest names in entertainment were quietly fighting a battle the public never saw. A battle with debt, with mismanagement, with contracts that drained them, with lifestyles they couldn't sustain. They were icons. Michael Jackson, the king of pop. Whitney Houston, the voice of a generation. Marvin Gaye, a soul legend. Judy Garland, Hollywood royalty. Farley, comedy's wild genius. They made millions, some made hundreds of millions. But when their lives ended, their financial realities told a very different story. How does someone sell out stadiums and still struggle with money? How does an icon worth millions end up drowning in debt? Tonight on Celebrity Unscreened, we look beyond the fame, beyond the headlines, and into the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the brightest stars burn the fastest and leave behind far less than the world expected. This is Celebrities Who Died Broke, and the truth may surprise you. Michael Jackson, the king of pop, and the cost of a crown. He wasn't just famous. He was global. From the moment he stepped onto the stage with the Jackson 5, the world saw something rare. A child with rhythm in his bones, a voice that didn't sound like it belonged to his age, a presence too big for any room. But that child would grow into something even larger. Albums like Thriller would redefine the music industry. Stadium tours shattered records. Endorsements poured in. At his peak in the 1980s, Michael Jackson wasn't just successful, he was untouchable. He earned hundreds of millions of dollars. He bought the legendary Neverland Ranch, a sprawling fantasy kingdom complete with amusement park rides, a zoo, and a private train. It wasn't just a home, it was an escape. A world built to protect a childhood he never truly had. But fantasy is expensive. And Michael's life became more expensive than almost any artist in history. Lavish spending. Multiple properties across the globe, art collections worth millions. Security teams, staff, maintenance, travel. At one point, his lifestyle reportedly cost millions per month to sustain. Then came legal battles. Allegations, court cases, settlements. Each one draining both his finances and his public image. By the early 2000s, the king of pop was no longer financially invincible. Despite owning half of Sony ATV's publishing catalog, one of the most valuable music catalogs in the world, Michael was heavily leveraged. He borrowed against his assets, loans stacked on loans. Interest mounted. By 2009, reports suggested he was facing debts estimated at over $400 million. The man who once dominated the globe was preparing for a comeback tour. This is it, not just to reclaim the stage, but to stabilize his finances. It was meant to be redemption. Instead, it became the end. When Michael Jackson died in June 2009, headlines focused on shock, grief, and conspiracy. But behind the scenes, lawyers and accountants were uncovering the true financial state of his empire. He had earned extraordinary wealth in his lifetime, but he had also carried extraordinary debt. Ironically, in death, his estate would generate billions, making him one of the highest-earning celebrities posthumously in history. But the man himself never saw that recovery. Michael Jackson's story is not just about fame, it's about scale. When your life becomes larger than the world, your expenses can become larger than your earnings. He built a kingdom. He owned history. But even the king of pop was not immune to the weight of financial reality. And that is the quiet truth behind the crown. Whitney Houston, the voice that shook the world, and the silence that followed. There are singers. And then there are voices that feel almost supernatural. Whitney Houston didn't just perform songs, she transformed them. When she released I Will Always Love You, it became more than a ballad. It became a cultural moment. By the early 1990s, she was one of the best-selling music artists in the world. Multi-platinum albums, box office success with The Bodyguard. Endorsements, awards, global tours. She earned tens of millions. From the outside, Whitney Houston had everything: fame, wealth, admiration. But behind the scenes, her life was becoming increasingly unstable. Substance abuse, personal struggles, and a turbulent marriage consumed not just her energy, but her finances. Tour cancellations meant lost revenue. Rehab stays meant extended absences. Legal and management expenses mounted. And as her career slowed, her spending did not. By the late 2000s, reports surfaced that Whitney was facing serious financial distress. Properties were sold, assets liquidated, support from industry peers became necessary. At one point, she was reportedly close to losing her Atlanta home. The comeback attempts were there, albums were released, tours were planned. But rebuilding an empire is far harder than building one the first time. When Whitney Houston died in 2012, the world mourned a legend. But financially, she was not the untouchable icon people assumed she still was. Like many stars before her, Whitney's peak earnings had not translated into long-term stability. And just like Michael Jackson, her estate would earn millions after her passing, profits she would never experience. Whitney Houston's story is heartbreaking, not because she failed, but because her talent was so extraordinary. And yet, even that wasn't enough to shield her from financial decline. Fame amplified her gift, but it also amplified her vulnerabilities. And in the end, the voice that once filled stadiums was left fighting battles far quieter and far more costly. Marvin Gaye, a soul legend, trapped between genius and debt. Before the tragedy, there was brilliance. Marvin Gaye wasn't just a Motown star, he was a revolutionary voice. When he released What's Going On, he shifted the sound of soul music forever. However, just music. It was social commentary. It was pain. It was protest wrapped in poetry. The hits kept coming. Sexual healing revived his career in the 1980s and earned him new awards, new acclaim, and new global recognition. He made millions over his career. But Marvin Gaye's financial life was chaotic. Divorces drained him. Lavish spending weakened him. And perhaps most damaging of all, the IRS came calling. Unpaid taxes piled up into the millions. At one point, Marvin owed so much that royalty checks from his music were redirected straight to the government. Imagine that. Creating timeless songs, and never fully enjoying the profits. In an effort to escape mounting pressure, Marvin relocated to Europe. It wasn't just about creativity, it was about survival. He needed space, financially and emotionally. But financial strain doesn't disappear just because you change countries. By the early 1980s, despite renewed musical success, Marvin Gaye was still buried under debt and obligations. The income was inconsistent. The expenses were not. Then came the unthinkable. In 1984, Marvin Gaye was killed by his own father. The world lost a genius. But financially, Marvin had been struggling long before that final day. The man whose music shaped generations, whose voice defined vulnerability, had spent years battling not just personal demons, but financial ones. His catalog would later generate enormous value. But like so many others in this story, the wealth attached to his legacy was not fully realized during his lifetime. Marvin Gaye's story is a reminder. Art can be immortal, but artists are human, and even legends can fall into financial ruin when success outpaces stability. Next, Judy Garland.
Before we go on, pause right now. This story opens your eyes, listen. Take 5 seconds, hit like now. Share this with someone who needs to see. Subscribe to Celebrity Unscreened, don't miss out. Pause, like, share, subscribe, click the bell.
Judy Garland, Hollywood's golden girl, and the price of early stardom. Before the fall, there was Oz. When Judy Garland appeared in The Wizard of Oz, singing Over the Rainbow, she became immortal. She wasn't just a child actress, she was magic. Hollywood studios built her image carefully, groomed her, controlled her, managed her contracts, her schedule, even her weight. She worked relentlessly through her teenage years and into adulthood, starring in musicals, recording albums, performing. She earned significant sums over her career. But here's the part the public rarely saw. Under the old studio system, actors often didn't control their money. Studios did. Contracts heavily favored production. Companies, managers took percentages, taxes mounted, medical expenses rose, and Garland's struggles with addiction, rooted in pills first given to her as a child to control energy and appetite, only intensified. The financial instability, divorces added pressure, lavish living during peak years, drained reserves. Poor financial planning compounded everything. By the late 1960s, Judy Garland was still performing, but not from a position of power. She toured because she needed income. She accepted gigs because debts lingered, despite being one of the most recognizable stars in the world. Reports indicate she died in 1969 with very little money to her name, no massive fortune, no untouchable estate. Just a legend whose value far exceeded her bank account. After her death, her legacy only grew stronger. Reissues, tributes, cultural impact. But like many artists of her era, the financial rewards of her work were never fully secured during her lifetime. Judy Garland's story isn't just about dying broke, it's about being controlled, about building an empire for others, while never truly owning your own. The girl who sang about somewhere over the rainbow spent much of her life chasing stability that always seemed just out of reach. Next, Chris Farley. Chris Farley comedy's wild genius and the cost of living too fast. He didn't just enter a room, he exploded into it. From his unforgettable performances on Saturday Night Live to cult classics like Tommy Boy, Chris Farley became one of the most electrifying comedic forces of the 1990s. He was loud, physical, fearless, and audiences loved him for it. Hollywood rewarded that energy. Film deals grew bigger, paychecks grew larger, fame accelerated rapidly. By the mid-1990s, Farley was earning millions per film, on track to become one of the highest-paid comedic actors of his era. But off-camera, the same intensity that made him magnetic was slowly destabilizing his life. Substance abuse consumed large portions of his income. Rehab stays interrupted production. Projects stalled. Insurance risks increased. When personal chaos follows you everywhere, financial stability rarely survives. Farley's spending matched his personality. Impulsive, generous, unfiltered. Friends were supported. Parties were frequent. The lifestyle never slowed down. But Hollywood is transactional. When reliability fades, opportunities shrink. In 1997, at just 33 years old, Chris Farley died of a drug overdose. The world mourned what felt like a once-in-a-generation talent. Financially, however, his estate was not the untouchable empire many assumed. Though he earned millions during his short career, much of it had been consumed by lifestyle, addiction, and unstable management. Unlike some icons whose estates exploded in value posthumously, Farley's wealth did not multiply into a vast financial dynasty. His legacy became cultural, not financial. Chris Farley's story is one of acceleration, fast fame, fast money, fast living. And when everything moves at that speed, there's rarely time to build protection. He made millions, but he never had time to secure them. And sometimes, that's the quiet tragedy behind explosive success. Celebrities who died broke the illusion of untouchable fame. They filled stadiums, they topped charts, they defined generations. And yet, when the curtains closed, when the lights dimmed, when the applause stopped, their financial realities told a quieter story. Michael Jackson built a kingdom larger than imagination, but even a king can drown in debt. Whitney Houston had a voice that felt limitless, yet her finances were not. Marvin Gaye changed music forever while battling tax pressure behind the scenes. Judy Garland became Hollywood royalty without ever fully controlling her wealth. Farley made the world laugh uncontrollably while living faster than stability could catch up. Different eras, different industries, different personalities. But one uncomfortable truth: fame does not equal financial security. Talent does not guarantee protection, and millions earned do not always mean millions kept. We are taught to envy the spotlight, the houses, the cars, the contracts, but rarely are we shown the pressure behind it. The loans taken to sustain an image, the contracts signed without leverage, the addiction, the isolation, the mismanagement. Success magnifies everything, including mistakes. This documentary is not about judgment, it's about awareness. Because the real tragedy isn't just that these legends struggled financially, it's that the world assumed they were untouchable, and sometimes, the most celebrated people are carrying the heaviest unseen burdens. If this changed how you see fame, if it challenged the illusion of wealth, then you're beginning to see why we tell these stories. On Celebrity Unscreened, we don't just celebrate the rise, we examine the cost. If you believe stories like these deserve depth, not headlines, subscribe and become part of a community that looks beyond the spotlight. Because behind every legend, there's a truth the world rarely stops to understand.